So we discuss what to do now. Our DM informs us that between the fighting, the chasing, the capturing, and the plot advancement, we'd picked up enough XP to level to 6. Naturally we all stop dead in our tracks to update our character sheets again, while the DM gets his notes ready for what happens next. I had a tough decision to make though. See, right from level 1 I'd been planning on getting Fell Flight at the first possible opportunity. Being level 6, I get my first chance at grabbing a more powerful Eldritch Invocation, and the ability to constantly fly was really high up on my list of desires. But I hadn't planned on hitting level 6, while on an island full of black onyx and shuffling corpses. The Dead Walk is another option at this level. And with my level, if I take that, I can control 24 hit die worth of undead creatures. I decided, in the end, that I can always take Fell Flight later. But I'd be a fool to look a gift horse in the mouth. And in this case, a gift horse takes the form of a pile of dead bats large enough to ride around on. And zombies retain their ability to fly. I had to bring it up with my teammates of course. How do you guys feel about our ship being crewed by the undead? Innocent smile responses were mixed. We don't have to pay them, we don't have to feed them, and they'll keep doing their job even while we're sleeping. We can't sail into any official port with them above deck, and if any authority checks our cargo hold, we could have big trouble. I bring up the possibility of dumping the zombies overboard before we reach land, and restocking them when we have fresh corpses available. Dragon Shaman, how many corpses do you expect to stumble across? Me, we're adventurers? Dragon Shaman, right, a metric crapload, right. In the end, it was decided this was a horrible idea that we should avoid. Kobold, I don't think it's the most sound and safe decision we could make as a group at this moment in time. Dragon Shaman, as captain I have to say I'm not in favor of it. As a devout worshipper of a good god, I have to say I'm strictly opposed to it. Swashbuckler, yeah, the whole undead thing probably won't be in our best's interest. Me, cough, you guys remember that there's a giant pile of rideable bat corpses up the mountain, right? Pause. Swashbuckler, I fully support Operation Undead Labor. Kobold, if I get a mountable bat zombie, you can turn everyone we meet into a walking corpse. Dragon Shaman, I hate you all. So because he can't sail the ship alone, the captain tolerates our plans. He mentions that we are crossing into the gray area of heroics, yet again. I point out that, while yes, abuse of a corpse is questionable, they're going to be turned into extensions of my will, so they're only as good or evil as I am. He points out that, if I lose control of them, they'll revert to trying to eat anything they can fit their jaws around. I ask, and that makes them different from normal carnivores how? He reluctantly agrees to go along with things. The large-sized bats were all 4 HD, so I have a rideable bat corpse for all 3 people who want one, and still have 12 HD worth of undead I can control. After cramming a few hundred gold worth of black onyx into their skulls, they're ready to ride. We'll need to make some custom saddles to make riding them easier, but we can cling to their backs for now. My DM also agreed to let me resurrect the 1/4 HD bats at 4 for 1, so I also have 12 normal-sized zombie bats sticking to the bigger one. Which I don't really think will come in handy, but it is fun. I also named my mount. The DM got annoyed. You've had living companions you didn't name, and you just named a zombie. I argued that it was more of a vehicle than a creature, and that we named the ship too. I call him Skyrat. I also resurrected 5 skeletons to serve us on the boat. Faster than zombies, easier to stuff into small areas to hide them if need be. I had 4 left on my HD limit to use during battles, which seemed like enough for now. The trick is, if a warlock uses black onyx to raise the undead, they're permanent. If I don't use black onyx, the zombies that result only last a few minutes. Which is perfect for mid-fight, because I can have a zombie fight for me, then crumble to dust without looking like I did anything suspicious. Moving on. We tried coaxing the dwarf woman to come out of her store, but she said she'd rather stay where she has food and safety. We're planning on informing the next port we're in about the situation, and that the undead have been cleared out, so they can safely restore order there. When we dock, we're going to stuff the skeletons in various hiding spots, and have the bats play dead and say we're using them for material and crafting. That should let us get away without too much legal trouble. We almost ended the session there, but we really wanted to get some more information out of the changeling for us to mull over in between games. So we collected everything useful we could from the town, including a whole mess of black onyx from back in the cave, and set off at sea. We figured we would have an easier time keeping track of the binder changeling on the open water, where she couldn't run off. We'd have to keep her tied up, of course, or she'd mimic us and probably start causing hell. We took her below deck while the skeletons manned things above. It stormed again when we were taking off, but thankfully, skeletons don't mind a little rain. We tried to lock a bell around her neck, really, since she was so quiet. She mocked us by washing her ears like a cat. We noticed the bell made no noise. That's when it hit us. She's not just mute, and she's not just stealthy. She literally can't make any noise. She seemed depressed when we pointed that out, so we asked why she looked upset about it. She thought for a minute, then moved her hands like she was playing piano and singing wordlessly. We asked if she'd been a musician, and she nodded. I asked, "This is a curse, isn't it?" She looked sadder, and nodded again. The factotum asked what happened. She gestured for something to write with. Swashbuckler, dude, she's a binder, we can't give her something to write with. God knows what she'll do. The dragon shaman gives her some parchment, ink, and a pen all the same. He tells the swashbuckler to cut off her hand if it looks like she's trying something stupid, to which she goes wide-eyed and puts one hand on her heart and one in the air, obviously promising to be good. The message she writes is very abrupt. Bard. Seduced wrong person. Betrayed wrong person. Curse. Fin. Factotum, so someone just wanted to hurt you as much as you'd hurt them. The changeling glares and writes thousand-fold music obviously meant a lot to her. Dragon shaman, why are you working with these people now? Why are you doing this? The changeling almost tears up at that, but writes, when he's a god, he promised to make me his herald. Swashbuckler, when who's a god? The changeling just glares. It's obvious we know who. The drifter. We pause for a minute, before the dragon shaman asks if there was some other way to break the curse. She writes, tried everything. He asks if we could find some way to break the curse, if she'd give up being evil. She adopts a mile-long stare, blankly looking at nothing in particular. She writes too late. Killed hundreds. Liked it. He sighs and says it's never too late. Anyone can be redeemed in time. She doesn't respond. I ask where they're taking the black onyx to. She looks at me like I'm an idiot. I ask if it's the ziggurat, and she puts one finger on the tip of her nose, and points at me with her other hand. The swashbuckler asks what they're trying to accomplish. She looks angry, throws down the pen and parchment. Question time must be over. Swashbuckler says we can beat the information out of her, as long as we don't break her fingers. Her form instantly changes to a terrified young woman, tear-streaked makeup and a black eye, shaking her head back and forth in fear, before changing just as fast to an expression of calm, resolved fury, and spitting in the swashbuckler's face. He punches her, splitting her lip. She licks her lips with a thin snake tongue, painting them red in the process and continuing to glare back. The dragon shaman says this obviously isn't going to get us anywhere. That we should just tie her up and give her time to think about things. The factotum uses an inspiration point to make a ridiculously high use rope check to make sure she's bound in the chair and can't move at all. Once we're confident she's not going anywhere, we go above deck to try to get our bearings against the storm and try to decide on a heading. Our DM informs us that a few minutes later, we see flashes of light coming from below deck and hear loud, labourd weeping. We rush into the room where she's kept, and see her still tied there, still unable to move. But in front of her is a seal, and a weeping vestige standing in it. She'd chewed the split in her lip and spit the seal onto the ground in her own blood. When she saw us, the vestige disappeared, by turning into streams of water and pouring into her. Instantly she began weeping, visibly, not audibly, as the vestige had. The walls begin to crackle with electricity, and she cringes and shuts her eyes tight. A bolt of lightning appears from nowhere and hits her square in the back. The sound and noise are deafening, and she's obviously scorched and in pain, but the lightning bolt also destroyed the ropes and part of the chair holding her in place. We moved to fight her, but she sprinted past us. I hit her with an eldritch blast, but she took it in stride, even though she was obviously badly damaged and in pain, and ran straight out into the storm, jumped onto the deck of the ship, and dove straight into the stormy waters. We moved to the edge. She'd taken my form, and was pretending, quite obviously, to struggle and drown, before switching to her pale gray mask, smirking at us, and sinking into the inky waters with a mocking wave goodbye. The dragon shaman dove after her, the only one who could breathe underwater, which she obviously could too now, due to the vestige, but between his armor and low swim checks, she disappeared into the murky depths. We got the dragon shaman back on deck. And the session ended. Session starts where the last one left off. Some crazy mute binder changeling just summoned lightning in the hold of our ship and managed to escape into the black choppy waters of the unforgiving sea. The four of us are up on deck with our 5-man skeleton band, fighting a horrible storm and trying to pick a heading to follow. The dragon shaman, who is technically the captain of the ship, once again wants to return to the desert continent. He reminds us that the drifter now has an undetermined number of spellcasting bugs, resurrecting warriors, a captive angel, and now a small group of skeletons carting a metric crapload of black onyx. We point out that we still don't know a whole lot about what's going on, and there are still 3 potential places to find new information about what's going on. TM. We've ruled out the Arctic. Even if the destination wasn't being listed as a lie, the odds of us finding anything to go on there are slimmer than elsewhere. We elect to head for the second port on the Dark Continent after all, but agree that unless we find a very good reason not to, our next step is going to be to haul back to the Egyptian continent, with a brief stopover in the central island to check in with Maku'ir and resupply, since that island is in the path between our next port and the ziggurat anyway. So off we sail, into dark and stormy waters, wondering in the back of our minds if a psychotic murderous changeling is clinging to the hull of the ship. It turned out to not be the case, because we safely made it to our next destination. We sailed into the port on an overcast morning through still choppy waters. The land itself looked to be a dense overgrown swampy jungle, and our first assumption had been that we'd lost our bearings in the storm. Then we saw a tiny dilapidated wooden pier at the mouth of a massive river, waving the flag of the Empire's colors, black, white and teal, for anyone concerned with such things. We pulled up to the rotten planks near as we could and docked, hoping our ship wouldn't just tear the pier clean off if it rocked in the water. Before we could do much, a man came walking out of the port master's shack with a lazy stride. His dress style was some combination of normal attire and native decoration, but all of it sported the Empire's colors. He waved as he came up to us. "Yeah, don't wanna be staying here. Plague's struck. Everyone's sick, ain't no one getting better." We asked him if he was the usual port master, and he let out a high-sad laugh. "Sure am. 5 years of stampin' papers here, or 25 years of hard labor back home. I'm still wondering if I got the better deal." We asked for the details of the plague, and he said it was like some kind of massive flu that everyone seemed to come down with at once. Headaches, chills, fever, vomiting. Symptoms kept changing, no one was getting healthy. Told us again we might as well take off. Again we told him we didn't have much choice, so he sighed and asked for our port documents. When we told him we'd come from an abandoned port, he looked at us dubiously. We promised it was the case, but he shook his head and put up his hand to shut us up. Told us he didn't actually care where we'd come from, 50 gold and he'd update our paperwork and be on our merry way. We agreed, if only to cause less long-term trouble. He actually updated our papers to include our leaving this port already, because he didn't want us interacting with him once we went further into the jungle, so we didn't bring the plague to him. We verified that the river was deep enough to sail a 10-man ship up it, and he nodded that we shouldn't have any problem, but that when the river forked, keep to the left. We asked what was down the right, and he said that it was nothing but a village of natives struck worst by the plague. He also told us if you ignore that advice and go to the village anyway, at least trust me on this one. Don't listen to a word Papa Hino says. Head full of crazy ideas, really shady guy. We asked who Papa Hino was, and he just shook his head and mouthed witch doctor before looking around nervously and heading back to his shack with a wave. So we set up the river. Naturally, the first thing we did when we saw the fork was to push right. It was difficult maneuvering, and eventually the water did run too shallow, and we had to leave the SS Iron Man where she sat. I gave the skeletons a few daggers and told them to defend themselves and the ship, but not to attack unless they or the boat were being tampered with. I considered that to be an acceptable balance between lethal misunderstanding and loophole allowing destruction of our ship. We took to the skies here, with 3 of us riding our giant zombie bats, and our dragonborn flying on his own wings, flying for a round here or there and then gliding along with us, since his wings can only support a few rounds of sustained flight per day. We spotted the native village in a clearing, and considered landing our bats in some trees and walking the rest of the way, but we opted to just land in the clearing. They looked so sick and listless we didn't think they would get too worked up, once we explained we were there to find out what was going on. We were completely right. Our landing on flying bat corpses and dismounting stirred no huge response. They were all watching us, confused and curious, the healthier looking ones anyway. Most of them seemed so ill they were delirious, with the ones who still had it together trying to tend to the worst off. Our dragon shaman was largely struck with empathy, asking the DM if his lay on hands ability would provide any help. I was worried that using the healing now would be a less than ideal tax on our collective resources, but he still knelt by the nearest person and put a hand to their forehead, promising he was trying to help, and letting a point of healing light pulse into them. It seemed to have no effect, so he tried a higher number, 5, but it still looked like it wasn't doing anything. That's when Papa Hino showed up. He came out of nowhere, coming up to our group from a previously empty direction. He was 7.5 feet tall if he was an inch, and slender as a scarecrow. He didn't look like your archetypical witch doctor, by which I mean there was no headdress or bone piercings or facial paint. There was no doubt about who he was though, he had a foreboding presence that demanded attention. You dasn't try and help, won't do no good, and they dasn't need any right now. The swashbuckler makes a passing comment that they obviously do need help, because they're obviously dying. Papa Hino just goes on talking in his deep monotone. I know what causing this here sickness. A man causing this here sickness, and when he leaves he takes that sickness with him. And he leavin' real soon. Come, Papa Hino needs your help. So of course we followed him. We walked to a dark and twisted tree growing half on the land and half out into the swampy water, when Hino reaches into its bundle of roots, and seemingly falls through them and into nothing. We just kinda stand there awkwardly, until Hino reaches his hand out and beckons for us to follow. So one by one, we go tumbling down through the roots and into a dank and dark little room. There's a bundle of rags in the corner that looks like a bed, a tiny table on the floor, and the walls are absolutely strewn with bones, shelves containing jars of eyes, live mice, and God knows what else. Hand-carved trinkets and voodoo dolls abound. Water is dripping from everywhere, and you get the distinct impression that we are definitely under the waterline of the swamp. Occasionally there will be a shimmer of something perfectly polished and cleaned, intricate gold objects and glass lenses and such, standing out against the otherwise filthy and horrifying surroundings. And Papa Hino is sitting cross-legged at his tiny table, which is covered in runes and symbols and laid out in an obvious pattern. He's shaking bones in his fists and throwing them across the table, scanning his eyes over to take them all in before scooping them up and shaking them again. He keeps doing this over and over while he talks, rattle, rattle, clatter, pause, scrape, rattle, rattle, clatter, in a perfect and unbreakable rhythm. He starts talking before we can say anything. You know in this man I spoke of. You searchin' for him, wantin' to stop him. He bad man, doin' bad things. Swashbuckler, the bones told you that. Papa Hino, your eyes told me that. I seein' you knowin' when I sayin'. I can help you against this man. He almost finishin' what he doin' here, and when he leaves, the sickness leaves with him. Papa Hino stares us all in the eyes one by one, never breaking his rhythm of the bones. But this man, he comin' back someday soon. And when he comin' back, he bringin' somethin' worse. Ain't no one gonna live no more when he comin' back. I asked what the drifter is trying to do. Papa Hino just replies with something bad. Some sickness. Bad sickness. We pause for a minute to take that in, before he goes on talking. I can ward this place against him for a while. Keep the sickness out. For a time. But I needin' ya help to do this. If an ya help Papa Hino helpin' ya. The spirits showin' me a boon for each of ya. Ya help me, and I give this boon to ya. We glance at each other before most of us either shrug or nod. The dragon shaman says we'll help any way we can. Papa Hino just keeps shaking his bones and throwing them at the table. A snake woman lives in the jungle. He points off in one direction during the pause before scooping his bones back up. She's a bad snake woman, and she be mad at us. We be feedin' her for years, meat. We ain't too sick to feedin' her anytime soon. She gettin' hungry. She come in for us soon. You bring me this woman's head, and I givin' ya da boon. He laughs, an unnerving monotonous laugh. But ya be sendin' the dragon man in first, ya hear? And with that, he gestures for us to leave. Being adventurers, a crazy witch doctor telling us to go murder a stranger for profit seemed like a perfectly normal turn of events. So after a quick inventory/gear check to make sure our stuff was in good repair and we were sound for combat, we took to the skies. The dragon shaman only had 2 rounds of flight left, so he reluctantly hopped onto the bat with the kobold, best weight distribution, and we set off. We didn't have to go far. It couldn't have been more than a mile before we noticed something odd against the dense jungle canopy. There was an obvious stonework path, abandoned and in disrepair but clearly man-made, leading up to the remains of a small 2-story stone building of some kind. A few locations had given in and showed the ground floor below, and through them, we could barely make out a small female figure. I had Eldritch Spear as one of my blast shapes, and she was in range of it. I wanted to pop her, but the group elected to land and find out at least a little more about the situation before we started shooting complete strangers in the back. We landed the bats near the stone pathway, and I ordered them to take back to the skies and circle above the building in case I needed them to swoop in for assistance. We set out up the path, and everything seemed relatively normal. And by relatively normal, I mean the area was completely devoid of natural life, and there were stray bones and skulls in every direction you looked, apparently tossed into larger piles the closer you got to the entrance. The building was obviously falling apart. Rough gravel in odd shapes, apparently from the collapsing stone, the whole building was covered in moss and vines, but a spot check made us realize there were still no signs of non-plant creatures. Not even bugs. We snuck up to the entrance and leaned around. We could see a cloaked and hooded female form walking around. We heard very faint, angry murmuring. The area was shadowy, and she was moving away from us, so her exact location was difficult to place. Remembering Papa Hino's suggestion, we sent the dragon shaman in first. We stayed pretty much lockstep behind him, checking every possible nook and corner. The woman had apparently disappeared from sight when we'd crossed the threshold. We took it slow, with no sign of her. Our assumption was that she knew we were here, and that we were playing on her terms. We turned out to be right, when we entered a room where the floor had given mostly in, and heard her voice from the broken balcony above, asking what we're doing in her home in a voice that sounded like wet ash being run through a grinder. The dragon shaman approached her calmly, saying that Papa Hino had sent us, but that we were interested in learning more about the situation. She giggled, an ancient rattling sound, and said there was nothing to learn. The dragon shaman asked if she didn't want to tell us her side of the story. She giggled again, and said, "I can show you my side of the story," before ripping back her hood and staring dead at the dragon shaman. He immediately rolled a fortitude save, and we all rolled initiative. He passed it, and tucked and rolled back to our group, saying, "F me, it's a Medusa." Me and the kobold immediately dropped our eyes to the ground and shielded our eyes with our hands. Just in case. Our fortitude saves were nil. The kobold's was worse than mine, but he can at least use inspiration to boost it up. I'm stuck trying to roll high numbers just to keep being made of meat. Nevertheless, I won initiative. So when actual combat began, my first course of action was to run blindly into the room, rough terrain and all, and fire a blind shot, total concealment, with my Eldritch Blast at the Medusa. And I hit her too, for a good roll at that. The kobold ran out too, and fired a blind hand crossbow shot, but missed. The Medusa went next, and she jumped down and used her gaze attack again, catching both of us in it. Total concealment meant I didn't have to roll against it, but the kobold didn't get lucky and did. Fortunately, he boosted the saving throw roll with his inspiration ability, and survived it. The swashbuckler cast True Strike, but stayed around the corner to attack the next round. The dragon shaman ran into range, and hit the Medusa with his fire breath for good damage. I backed up to the wall and out of her gaze's range, and fired another Eldritch Blast, which missed this time. The kobold used an inspiration point to cast Acid Arrow, and connected with it, which was great because it meant 3 rounds of acid damage for her. The Medusa dashed through the crowd, passing by the dragon shaman, the kobold, and coming to stop in front of me, sticking to the wall. Her snake hair bit every one of us on the way. The dragon shaman shrugged off the poison. The kobold used his last bit of inspiration on the saving throw roll again, but the poison went straight to my heart. 4 strength damage, half my strength, later, and I was a wreck. The swashbuckler dashed into the room and two-handed power attacked for a promised hit, and a beautiful damage roll. It was glorious. The dragon shaman attacked her for another chunk of hit points. I spider climbed up the wall, yelling up to my bats babies. "Kill her," before firing another blind Eldritch Blast. Whiff. They start swooping down for an assault. The kobold takes a swing and connects, but for 1d4-1 damage. The Medusa uses her gaze attack, and things got ugly. The kobold and me both immediately failed and turned to stone where we stood. The problem was, he was trying to cover his face and standing on solid ground. I was magically clinging to the wall 20 feet up and supported by nothing but the force of my own dark will. I came tumbling down, straight onto my legs, which cracked and shattered under the weight. Oh! The fight raged on. The swashbuckler dropped his long sword and quick drew his rapier, striking with it for another decent damage roll. She was looking to go down for the count. The dragon shaman closed the gap and attacked for another chunk of hit points. The Medusa used her gaze attack again, and this time, the swashbuckler failed his saving throw too, turning to a statue where he stood. It was her last action though. The dragon shaman's breath weapon had recharged, and he rolled max damage. He actually threw his hands up and shouted Yahtzee, after he rolled. For a more cinematic description, he actually pressed his hand over the Medusa's face, slammed the back of her head against the stone wall, and aimed low, charring her body to a crisp below the neck with such a vicious blast that her body literally just gave away under her neck and collapsed. Then the bats came and landed around him. They hadn't made it down in time for the fight. The DM decided that me being a statue didn't mean they were out of my control, thankfully, so they just sat around waiting for my next order, which obviously wasn't coming. The dragon shaman scooped up the Medusa's head into a sack, so he wouldn't have to worry about glancing at it the wrong way, and then set about rummaging through the abandoned building. He found a few interesting things. A pair of dice that were seemingly carved out of bone and covered in strange runes, that he tucked safely into a pack. Some silver and gold coins, some gems and jewelry. And a small jar absolutely covered in tiny lizard statues, which were probably just tiny lizards, petrified in a huge number of layers. In the jar was a translucent blue goo, and when the dragonborn wiped the goo on the side of the jar, one of the lizards sprang to life and ran off into the jungle. So he naturally returned to us, and brought the kobold and swashbuckler back to life. The three of them stood around for a while, debating on what to do with me. My stone legs were absolutely shattered. Pacing them back together would take God knows how long, and that's if they could even find all the right paces in the gravelly rubble. Closer examination revealed that a lot of the gravel was actually stone insects, so the odds of pacing me back together was nil. Then the swashbuckler raised the gruesome possibility of my mangled legs rotting off of me if they did something wrong. It was that comment that made them decide to resurrect me sans lower limbs. So, that sucks. The dragon shaman thinks it's ironic justice. I skipped over the ability to fly at will in order to have zombie mounts. Now I need a zombie mount to move under my own power. He chuckled. I glared. The zombie bats move at 20 feet, so I'm the slowest party member on land now. But my adventuring career isn't over. I auto-fail any dex or strength check that needs legs, and take a massive penalty to full-body dex checks. But my actual dexterity is still okay, and my aim with my Eldritch Blast is still fine. So I just have to rely on clinging to a zombie bat's back for most situations. I'm less mobile in general, but it could be worse. I could have shattered outright. My character is in full-on hardcore emo mope mode over her loss though. My current plan, 2 levels from now, is to immediately take the Fell Flight invocation so I can fly under my own power, and then to immediately purchase a floor-length dress. I'll be floating like a wraith, but at least I'll be more or less where I was before. So we saddle up, and fly back to the village. The swashbuckler and dragon shaman have to help me into Papa Hieno's underground hut thing. But we all get situated. He's put his bones away by now, and it looks like he's been busy. The entire hut looks like its contents have been rearranged. He laughs when we tell him what happened, and asks for the bag. He fondles the head through the fabric, nodding to himself when he feels the snakes. Says that he's very glad she's dead, and that he's gonna cut the snakes off and put them around the village to ward off outsiders, that it'll keep them all safer, longer. Then he says that the spirits got 2 boons for each of ya now. He has the kobold sit in the middle of the table, with me leaning in behind him. The swashbuckler and dragon shaman sat on either side of the 2 of us. First, he says, he's giving us all a boon of knowledge, but he points at me and says, "Dis boon for ya, most of all." He pulls a cage down from over his shoulder, full of the tiny little white mice. He opens the door and says, "All right, now I need 10 of ya babies to help Papa Hino now," and 10 of them scurry out. They're still moving like mice, randomly, darting around, but they all moved out as a group all the same. He shut the door to the cage, still teeming with the other rodents, and left it there on the table. Then he scoops up a cup and pushes one of the mice into it. The other 9 just run around the patterns on the outside of the table, never crossing into where the runes and symbols and letters are. He gestures to me and leans across the table, until we're almost nose to nose, before saying one word. Priest. Only he says it priest-ha. I arch my eyebrows in surprise, and he goes on, yeah be knowin' him den. De spirits don't lie do dey? Dis priest-ha, he a bad man. He doin' bad things, de spirits don't like him none at all. Papa he no cups his hand over the cup and starts rattling it around ruthlessly, probably bludgeoning the hell out of the poor mouse inside, before uncupping his hand and pouring the mouse out into the middle of the table. The mouse runs in a dizzy circle, before finally coming to rest, at which point Papa Hino slams a thin iron spike down through the base of the mouse's neck and into one of the symbols. Our group reciton was O. He scoops another mouse into the cup and repeats the process. De spirits, dey gonna tell us where ya be findin' more about dis priest-ha. Dey gonna show where ya goin' to learn to stop him. He pours out another mouse, waits for it to stop and slams another spike down into the table. He does it with all 10 of them, before looking down at the pattern the mice formed, and mouthing wordlessly. Papa Hino don't know what dis here means. But de spirits say you do, pointing at me directly. As an aside, this next part is something me and the DM set up ahead of this session. It was setting this up that probably saved my character. Spider climbing up a wall while fighting a Medusa was a poor tactical decision, and the fact that I lost my legs instead of shattering entirely is probably because our DM wanted the plans to carry on. He hasn't said that, it's just the vibe I get. Papa Hino just says one simple sentence. Mercy Glade. I just stare blankly at him, before replying quietly, the asylum. The factotum asks what asylum, and I respond, the asylum they put me in when I started talking back to the voices. The table, the real table, the one the players are sitting at, is quiet for a minute, and the swashbuckler leans off to the side and says, I now take a 5-foot step away from the warlock. We all laugh, and then the game continues. Papa Hino nods and goes on, yeah be goin' back to Mercy Glade. Yeah be findin' more about dis priest-ha. Yeah be learning how to stop him. I just nod quietly, looking concerned to the point of illness. Then he pulled out the spikes, scooped the dead mice into another box, poured some white liquid into it, closed it, and shook it all around while chanting. When he opened the box to pour the contents back into the cage with the mice, the 10 helpers he'd spiked all looked completely normal, hale, and healthy. Then Hino reaches into the box next to his table and starts pulling out odd little trinkets. The swashbuckler gets a little wooden ring, intricately carved around the entire length. He says it'll give him more magic, and help him use it better. It turns out that the ring gives him an extra 4 first-level spell slots, and lets him cast first-level spells as a swift action twice a day. The factotum gets some kind of sandals. They're more like leather circles that go under the arch of the foot, and lace up around the ankles. They turn out to give him an extra 10 feet move rate, and let him make some downright ridiculous jump checks. Which is exactly what he wants out of life. It also gave him 2 extra inspiration points. The dragon shaman gets what looks like tiny golden webs made out of delicate feathers, that Papa Hino draps over the spikes on his wings. The golden clings to the dragon shaman's skin, and will allow him to fly for 3 times as long as he could otherwise. When he gets the ability to fly indefinitely, the feathers will increase his maneuverability by 1 step. I get a pair of black leather wrist braces, laced, and covered in red runes. There are holes for more lace work to be done, and 1 thin silver chain laced on lower left brace. He also gave me a matching set of short black leather straps, and an additional chain. The way the extra straps sat, it looked like a loopy X made to go over a sphere. I had a clue what the extra bit was for. The braces themselves pumped up my Eldritch Blast by 2d6, and gave me an extra invocation of the lowest level, still no fell flight. Papa Hino says okay, de girl got the knowledge, yat all got yat things. 3 boons left. He pulls out 3 bottles of foul black sludge, and hands one each to the swashbuckler and dragon shaman. He tells the kobold to put his hands face down on the table in front of him, and sets the 3rd bottle between them. He tells the 2 holding the bottles to drink. They hesitate, naturally, and he says, drink now before ya makin' the spirits angry. Since we're adventurers, and doing stupid things is just a matter of course for us, they both chug the bottles together while cringing. Then they both immediately pass out onto the floor together. Before me or the kobold can react, Hino pulls out 2 more of those iron spikes and slams them down through the center of the kobold's hands, nailed them to the table. As the kobold scream, Hino, fast and practiced, opened the bottle and pours it out over both of his hands, before putting his hand on the kobold's face and shoves him back so hard his hands slide up over the tops of the spikes, leaving them still in the table and covered in blood and a nasty black syrup. The kobold topples back, knocking us both to the ground, and passes out on top of me. Papa Hino moved too fast to respond to, stepping over the table in one motion, and leaning down over me. I managed to get out, was this a double cross, before Hino exhales a black cloud of smoke in my face, saying sleep now girl. We all come to it about the same time. Sitting out in the sunlight, laying in the middle of the village clearing, coming to with the worst headaches any of us have had. We ran over to the roots of Hino's hut, but it seemed to be nothing but dirt underneath. The entrance was gone. It turned out, whatever Hino had done was a blessing of some kind though. The swashbuckler got +2 dex and another first-level spell known, which he didn't consider too hot, but we talked him into taking protection from evil. Since he's our strongest attacker, we like the idea of him having a buffer against being mind-controlled. The dragon shaman got a +2 to con and a +2 to cha, as well as being able to manifest 2 auras at once. He checked. He can still take the double draconic aura feats to manifest 3 at once, at some point. Pretty darn handy, as the extra con is actually another 3 rounds of flying for him, and the extra cha increases the multiplier for how many lay on hands healing points he has. The kobold got it the coolest though. When we checked, his hands had 2 perfect holes through them in the shape of eyes. The skin around them was jet black, and the black was spreading rapidly. If you looked closely, you could actually see it bleeding ever so gradually into his normal skin color. By nightfall, the black will have encompassed him entirely, and given him the shadow template. Shadow Kobold. Wicked. He's trying to decide between fast healing 2 or damage reduction 5/magic for his shadowy perk. Now, we have a problem here. A combination of me getting more into the flow or writing, and this session being very role-playing heavy with less combat, means we're actually only half of the way through Tuesday night session, and this post is already ridiculously huge. I'm going to stop and post this while I work on the rest of this session, and hopefully I'll have the second part up before our next game Saturday. I'll work on being a little more concise in the future. Second half of the last session, go. So we finished testing out the new toys Papa Hino gave us, and content like adventurers always are, read, immediately looking for the next great conquest. We set back off for our ship. The other players had to help me onto my bat, and the humiliation and frustration resultant meant that I pretty much vowed to never leave my bat again, until I was capable of flying under my own power, or found an upgraded mount. We made our way back to the SS Iron Man, and found she was still unhassled, along with the hiding skeleton crew. So with some difficulty we pushed back down the river and continued sailing further up the other path. On deck, we took a closer look at the 2 6-sided dice the dragon shaman had found in the Medusa's gear. One die was mostly incomprehensible arcane symbols. Knowledge Arcana skill checks revealed a little more about what they meant. The symbols were summed up as draconic, giant, skeletal, fiendish, unnatural, and swarm. The other die had animal symbols on it. A wolf, a bird, a spider, a tiger, a rabbit, and a humanoid. Knowledge checks turned up nothing. Factotum, well, throw M. So we cleared a spot on the deck and the dragon shaman rolled the dice. It came up giant and tiger. For a moment nothing happened, but then the dice turned solid black, and a huge tiger flashed into existence standing above them. The tiger looked at us, roared, and charged in attack. It was strong, but we still managed to mop it up with a minimum of real danger. The dice had turned solid black, but we could see they were slowly changing color. We figured that was our indicator of how long before we could use them again, but it was too early to tell if it was once a day, or a few times per day, or what. The dice seemed interesting. They were a wild card, for sure. It was obvious that it summoned a monster based on what roll came up, but the monster clearly also had no loyalty to the dice thrower. Hopefully it would just attack everything nearby at random, meaning we could find ways to use it to our advantage, clear range, have kobold throw dice from rafter, watch chaos. We sailed upriver, looking at the shoreline for anything suspicious. Finally, we saw another ship anchored by some trees up ahead, and closer examination revealed that the thing was utterly swarming with insects. In fact, they were swarming so thickly that the entire vessel was in a thick black cloud of them. Even from the other ship, we could tell that some of them looked clearly dangerous. There was no way we were going to board the ship. The factotum raised the possibility that the bugs were some kind of defense mechanism. A shield for the ship or something, while the owner is away. It was working. We kept our distance from the cloud of possibly venomous insects, possibly carrying malaria or something. But we knew this was a lead we had to check up on. Especially when we snaked around the ship and got OT the shore, only to find an obvious trail of insects crushed under human feet leading off into the trees. Naturally we stumbled off in that direction, tracking down whoever it was. What did confuse us was that it was only one set of tracks leading away from the boat. Either the person at the helm could handle it all alone, less than likely, or they were pulling some shenanigans like us with a fake crew. Either way, the person we were tracking was not someone to take lightly, so we approached cautiously, amazed at the sheer number of crunched bug corpses strewn about. At one point during the tracking, we found a crystal cantrip casting bug crushed underfoot, and looted the 2 remaining crystals, mage hand ones, oddly enough. We actually had to track for 2 days at a brisk pace, with a few small random animal encounters on the way. Finally we came to a valley, and saw where we were going. It was another ziggurat, one that was almost identical to the one back on the Egyptian continent. Only this one was unearthed, and came almost to the top of the very deep valley. It was easily 50 stories, with a base the size of several city blocks. Our DM had us roll spot checks, and we noticed that, in this area, things weren't quite right. The vegetation was growing in strange patterns. Leaves were thicker in some areas as opposed to broader. Insects had odd numbers of legs, too many legs. We found spiders with wings, lizards with multiple eyes, and so on. Like this area was full of mutations or something. We suspected the ziggurat as the cause, and pressed on, following the tracks to the base. We could see no way in, but that wasn't our primary concern, since the tracks actually led up the side. So we just flew up, keeping an eye for where the dead insects were the heaviest, until we finally saw it leading into a crack in the side of one of the levels, give or take 30 stories up. We squeezed in, literally, it was a squeeze for large creatures, and the bats are large, and continued following the tracks. There were bugs on everything, and the further in we got, the thicker they seemed to get. It was the earlier ziggurat all over again. The deeper we got, the more we heard this creepy insane muttering in an entire smattering of languages. The babble would go from common, to infernal, to celestial, to Ignan, to a language none of us knew, and back again. And again, we round a corner to find our beloved drifter pacing through a massive swarm of bugs, angrily babbling to himself in a way that only the insane can seem to muster. A lot of it we didn't understand, but we did catch the phrases, ultimate parasite, and ascension. We remember what happened last time. This guy almost single-handedly took out our party. We were debating trying to sneak attack him, or whether we should try to start a dialogue, from a distance obviously, when our decision was made for us. Some of the nearby bugs started chittering and flying at an increased intensity. So intense that it spread like a wave. The entire open chamber the drifter was in turned into a scream of tiny insect wings as they alerted him to our presence. He turned to the doorway, and muttered louder, hoo 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 hoo. So, we got ready for grief and poked our heads around the corner. He barely even reacts to recognizing us. Just mutters, bothering us again still bothering us, thought we killed them, priest was right there still alive bothering us. He stuck his tongue out and pulled a centipede crawling across his face in with it and bit down with a crunch. Our factotum starts to say, we don't want to fight, we just want to know what's going on. But the drifter just angrily mutters, no don't listen to them, we're done here anyway, we have to leave. And with that, giant insectoid wings tear out through his back and through the filthy rags he wears, and he immediately begins fluttering up into the darkness. Now we start to fly up after him, but we're hit with another massive swarm of stinging venomous insects. By this level, we're fighting them off pretty well, and we think we'll be able to do a general mop-up with fire breath and high-level tricks, but that's right around the time the giant spiders descended from the ceiling on silent strands, and the spell-casting bugs began swarming us, hitting us with fireballs and vampiric touch. We were definitely outgunned, and actually took to running away once our hit points got too low, and the bugs showed no sign of stopping. The factotum did manage to pocket 3 fireball crystals though. By the time we fought our way back into the daylight, where the majority of the bugs didn't venture back out into, we couldn't see the drifter in any direction. He was probably crafty enough to duck down into the trees, rather than soaring blatantly through the midday sun. We flew back to the ship, and the drifter's ship still sat there, still cloaked in a cloud of angry bugs. He'd either taken off on his wings, or he'd hidden below deck. We landed on the deck of our own ship, and lit his ship on fire from a distance, just to be sure, and eagerly set off to get back down the river. It was around this time that it hit me. Our bats had taken a severe pounding during the bug fight, and they were now critically important to my survival and sanity. I took my own bat down below decks to keep him safe and out of harm's way, and began thinking of ways to start healing/protecting him a little better for the next few levels. We don't have any reliable way to generate negative energy, so right now he's sitting at dangerously low hit points and I'm feeling remarkably vulnerable. We've discussed it a bit since then. Cleric, for inflict spells, is out, because only one of us have the WIS necessary, and he's not multi-classing. I hate to delay my warlock progression any, and I certainly am looking forward to getting Fell Flight as quick as possible, but I may take a level of Dread Necromancer the next time we level, just for the ability to pump unlimited negative healing into my now oh so important Sky Rat. It's not like I don't already have the whole undead aficionado thing going for me. We're still up in the air about what to do now. Mercy Glade Asylum is back in the temperate continent controlled by the Royal Empire. Even the Dragon Shaman thinks going there as soon as possible is a good idea. We also know that the villain's plot is starting to come together, and we do want to bring the heat to them. Going to Mercy Glade first will probably give us some critical backstory, and maybe even a necessary key to winning the good fight, TM. On the other hand, we're adventurers, and we can probably pull off something just crazy enough to work, TM, if we go straight to the other ziggurat. Our next game is tonight, so we'll see what happens. And we're all caught up. It's a good feeling. This is a little shorter than the first half, even though it took about the same length of time. Out of necessity, I cut back a little on the extra details, so I could have the core critical stuff posted before our next game session. If I start falling behind, things will get very abrupt when I'm trying to write it all out. Glad everyone's still enjoying my ramblings though.